This lecture is being given in support of English Olympiad students, those of you who are writing the National English Olympiad exam in 2021 for SACEE, the South African Council for English Education. It is one of 3 lectures, and the details may be found in my website, which is 4, muse.org. Details below. The visuals and the music is by Sonia Fanucchi. All experience is a story unfolding daily in our lives. Our thoughts are hidden stories, sometimes bursting to be told. And a story has no beginning or end. Arbitrarily, one chooses that moment of experience from which to look back or from which to look ahead. These are the words of author Graham Greene. And it is these moments of experience that the English Olympiad has presented us with this year in its anthology aptly entitled, This Is My Story. There is something magical about stories. From when they were first told to us as paintings on cave walls, stories are powerful. They hold us in their thrall. They keep us entranced. And in these stories, we see glimpses of ourselves, of our own experience, and of perhaps the experiences that echo in the vast story of all of humankind. Stories sometimes creep fable-like into literature itself. Some of you may remember the opening of P.B. Shelley's famous poem, Ozymandias, which speaks directly to this issue of storytelling. It goes like this. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. In this way, the narrative structure sets up a story within a story. These vivid images of the enormous, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone and the image of the shattered visage, the shattered face, which lies half sunk in the desert sand, fill us with wonder and even unspoken questions of who this enormous, decrepit statue represents as it crumbles away in the desert sand, and wonder at how the story will unfold, and even perhaps how this vast, decaying statue will relate to the persona who speaks the poem. In fact, travel is generally a great inspiration for autobiographical writing. And we will see that when we deal with the short story New Horizons, but that will be in a later lecture. Although all the stories in the anthology are presented from a first-person narrative perspective, the anthology does offer us different approaches and different genres. The first genre is a dramatic monologue, isn't it? The first genre is a dramatic monologue, and the character of Kathy gradually unfolds as we go along. At the heart of this story, I feel, there is a gnawing sense of loneliness, a sense of a sadness and of alienation, in fact, as we go along. Initially, we are presented with the character of Kathy, the image of Kathy as an English immigrant. She's aged about 25 and she is alone in her coupe on the blue train. Now, the irony is that she's on a journey, but we're given a muddle of flashbacks into the past. And this highlights an endless round of events. And it conveys the idea that she's trapped in this round of events, each of which seem to echo the failed marriage with her husband, and even an overriding sense of failure. Even before Kathy speaks, there is a sense of theatricality that sets the mood. We are told by the stage directions that she is alone in her coupe on the blue train. And that highlights her sense of loneliness. We are told that she is holding an orchid and it is mounted. We're told that she's holding an orchid and that it's mounted inside a cellophane box. This is a gift from her husband. But the way that it's described suggests that there is something funereal about it. This orchid mounted in what is presumably a rectangular box. There's something funereal about that image. If we look a little bit further down on that same page, we'll see that from the outset, Kathy expresses a sense of discontent, doesn't she? She says, nearly all his presents are like that, things what he likes. Once, he gave me a set of yellow kitchen utensils for my blue and white kitchen. So I said, oh, they're lovely, Mark, lovely. But would it be okay if I changed them for blue ones? Went into a moody, didn't he? I'm on the train because of my nervous breakdown. Me? Having a nervous breakdown? Makes you laugh, doesn't it? But the reader doesn't laugh. Kathy is warm and chatty. But it is actually her sense of fallibility and vulnerability that engage the reader, isn't it? And there is something winsome about her. In fact, her depression quickly becomes evident. She says, I just started crying one day and I couldn't stop myself, tears rolling down my face. Her failed relationship and the lack of understanding pierce through her husband's attempts to mollify her with gifts. And I believe that a sense of cultural alienation cannot be discounted in this story. If you look at the bottom of page 1, she says, now if I'd been in England, I reckon I'd have been okay. Because if you start crying your eyes out in a London supermarket, you could be sure some old dear would rally around with tea and sympathy. The anguish of clashes of cultural expectations is actually really felt in this story. Caught up in her misery on the train, all these memories of discomfort come flooding back into her mind. And the contrast between the sympathy that some old dear would have provided in England is made clear when she compares it to her experience in South Africa, which she describes as, it was weird, really, the way everybody ignored me. Anybody would have thought I was invisible. Being alone has often been associated with melancholy in literature. One thinks of Wordsworth's Solitary Reaper. Behold her single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing to herself, stop here or gently pass. Alone she cuts and binds the grain, and sings a melancholy strain. Oh, listen, for the veil profound is overflowing with the sound. There are many ways to tell a story. The young girl, the Highland lass, is solitary. The persona is arrested by the melancholy song she sings alone in the fields as she cuts and binds the grain. It seems to him as if her plaintive song fills the whole valley. Oh, listen, for the veil profound is overflowing with the sound. He wonders about the significance of the song. Will no one tell me what she sings? Perhaps the plaintive numbers flow for old unhappy far off things and battles long ago. Or is it some more humble lay, some familiar matter of today, some natural sorrow, loss or pain that has been and may be again? The song of pain and loneliness is a universal language which sings in the hearts of all of humanity. In On the Blue Train, there's a terrible sense of loneliness. It really is at the root of the story. And there's a cutting sense of alienation, often cultural alienation, isn't there? If we look at On the Blue Train, yes, on page 2 of the Blue Train, On the Blue Train, Kathy confides in Dr. Macartney. I told him how lonely I was living in South Africa without my mates, and how I missed cracking a joke with the petrol attendants, the barrow boys and people like that. But there are moments, aren't there, when the pain and loneliness becomes unbearable. I think of John Keats, who described the pain in these words, where men sit and hear each other groan. It was the way John Keats described the agony of watching over his dying brother. In this story, Kathy says, it was a misty day. I could hear the old Mooley Point foghorn moaning away in the distance. After a while, I started imitating it. It went moo, and I went Moo. Talk about crackers, she says. It's interesting that Kathy is aware that her reaction is abnormal. And she even mocks herself, doesn't she? She's aware that her reaction is abnormal, and she even mocks herself. She mocks herself, suggesting in that phrase, talk about crackers, suggesting that that she is mentally unsound, even mad. So there are multiple layers of irony in this, aren't there, in this particular story? There are multiple layers of irony. What other irony do we become aware of in this story? There is also the irony that she is on the blue train, and that is the epitome of luxury. The gift of the orchid, the flower arranging course in Constantia, all of these are really social amusements of a very affluent lifestyle, in fact, aren't they? But if we note her language in this short story, her use of language suggests that perhaps she doesn't belong to that well-educated social bracket. There are layers upon layers of irony. Perhaps even the colour blue could suggest that sadness Sadness accompanies that choice of word on the blue train. Could even suggest sadness or melancholy, couldn't it? So if we look at page 4, for example, in page 4 perhaps, we become aware that in the end, even irony is inadequate in conveying a depression so great that it is as if the solid bottom of expectations is wrenched away, and only despair, this terrible, overwhelming despair, sucks one further and further into this endless whirlpool from which it is difficult to emerge, isn't it? Kathy is acutely aware of Mark's embarrassment at her breakdown, and she actually says that after a few weeks, his friends started coming around. He was scared stiff to leave me alone with them, frightened I'd start doing my foghorn number, I expect. From the abyss of despair and cold isolation, she has to face the ultimate betrayal. He doesn't want to be with her. Now, you can't blame me for thinking that he meant a holiday for the two of us. But no, he wants old Red Eyes out of his sight for a few days. Perhaps the nail in the coffin are his words to her just before she leaves. He says, "If you could just iron a few suits before you go so that I won't run short. Surely this begs the question of whether he regards her as a domestic helper or as a soulmate, doesn't it? The structure of this monologue is interesting as well, because the twist in the end could seem to paint the picture of the protagonist in a completely different light. If we think of that ending, all the way through the monologue, she has been presented as a victim, and the reader's sympathy is engaged. But in the conclusion, perhaps we could see her in a different light. She says, "It's ever so peaceful on the old blue train. A nice way to see a bit of Africa. When we get to Joburg, I'll go straight to the airport. I've got a confirmed booking on British Airways, jumbo to London. I'm going home." Slow fade to black. What is the impact of this conclusion? Does it make one reconsider their relationship and even perhaps her characterization? That twist in the end is powerful. How do we see it? Do you consider her cold, clinical, detached, as she intends to leave him without even discussing their marriage? Or do you see it, this turnabout, as brave, as uncharacteristically brave even, as saving herself from the oblivion, if you like, that their relationship would condemn her to? It's a very dramatic conclusion, isn't it? It's a very dramatic conclusion. And it's powerful in that perhaps it hints at the complexity of life. That there are no simple answers. That perhaps there are more questions than answers. And perhaps the conclusion, as stark as it is, as unexpected as it is, engages the reader emotionally and intellectually, and perhaps implies truths that the author has not specifically addressed. And I think that's a truth of the autobiography generally as well. I think the stories give the impression that they are presenting the whole truth. But I think that actually they're just slices of life, aren't they? And perhaps their value is that they hint at the complexity of a larger web of experience that hasn't specifically been spelt out. And of course, the structure and the genre might well enhance this idea. Cultural differences are as significant in the Blue Train as they are in a poem written by Thomas Hardy. Cultural differences. And the poem that I'm going to read to you is called Drummer Hodge. It was written in 1899, and in this poem, the anguish of the persona is caused by the death and burial of a young British soldier in the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa, far away from his home. So a soldier far from home, caught up in war. They throw in Drummer Hodge to rest, uncoffined, just as found. His landmark is a koppie crest that breaks the veldt around, and foreign constellations west, each night above his mound. Young Hodge, the drummer, never knew, fresh from his Wessex home, the meaning of the broad karoo, the bush, the dusty loam, and why uprose to nightly view strange stars amid the glow. Yet portions of that unknown plain will Hodge forever be. His homely northern breast and brain grown to some southern tree, and his strange-eyed constellations reign, his stars eternally. The acute anguish of the innocent young man meeting his fate so far away from home, where his body, so carelessly tossed into an unmarked grave, will literally merge with some southern tree, some foreign landscape. But there can be no union between contrasting cultures, as each night, even the stars above his grave, even those stars will be foreign constellations. In On the Blue Train, the misunderstanding arises from the clash of cultures, doesn't it? On the Blue Train, the misunderstanding really arises from the clash of cultures. And this seems to lead inevitably to the death of the relationship. In the poem, When He Spoke to Me of Love, which is on page 9, it's by M.A. Mokhomo, culture is presented in a totally different light, and we are drawn into the Basotho-Sesotho culture as well as the marriage customs of this culture. In this poem, as in On the Blue Train, the focal point is relationships. But even in this poem, if you scratch just under the surface, those insecurities are there. The day he first spoke to me of love, the day he taught me in those words, the marvel in my breast and dreams, I dreamed even in the middle of the day. My voice was burnt away, a fire in my throat licked at my words. The repetition of the day he first spoke to me of love, the day he taught me of those words, emphasizes the importance of that momentous day. That day when he says he loves her. I'm sure many of you can identify with that thrilling moment when the beloved says that they love you. He says he loves her, and she is speechless in the throes of her emotions. A fire burned in my throat and licked away at my words. Yet, even in the midst of her enchantment, fear struck fast and heavy at my side, that he might change, and barking dogs drive off the bridal cattle bought for me. In relationships, underlying moments of insecurity are universal. Who has not experienced fear that the beloved's feelings might change? The last 6 lines are full of evocative images, as they evoke the mood of the Basotho culture, and in particular of the marriage custom, where the bride price is paid in cows, and this brings the couple together and it brings the families together. But it is more than this, isn't it? Within the framework of the splendor of the Basotho marriage ceremony, it conveys personal fears, it conveys pride, and it conveys reverence and passion. I came trembling to him on my knees, as if stooped down in a prayer of love. My beloved, his voice more sweet, his young mouth poured a stream of gold. My great one. The diction idolizes him, doesn't it? It's as if she idolizes him. In the Blue Train, On the Blue Train, fears, personal misunderstandings, personality, all destroy or contribute towards destroying the relationship between Kathy and her husband. In this poem, When He Spoke to Me of Love, the fears are overcome, and there is a sense of harmony and understanding of cultural norms in the marriage ceremony. Ultimately, it is in the last two lines where she says, "My great one, he looked long into my face, and my tongue, unstrung, confessed to him." These concluding two lines capture the wonder, that trembling, fearful, miraculous moments of recognition of mutual love, where she too can finally express her love for him as well. Isn't it marvelous? Isn't poetry wonderful? The way that it can hold up a mirror to ourselves, where we can see, we can identify with it. I'm sure many of you identify with that moment where you have the courage and the trust to express your love as well. Here, poetry holds up a mirror to us. We identify with it, and there's a common understanding, really, in all of humanity. Poetry is the mirror that shows us this common understanding, isn't it? Well, good luck as you set out on your English Olympiad studies, and I'm sure that it will be an exciting journey of discovery.